Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome to another forecast discussion. We have a moderate risk, level 4 out of 5, here hoisted by the SPC today for parts of western Tennessee into far eastern Arkansas, eastern Louisiana, pretty much all of Mississippi, and western Alabama, surrounded by enhanced and slight risks as well. The main threats today are going to be tornadoes, perhaps some strong, particularly in the red hatched area there. Pretty broad 15 hatched area here, all the way from Memphis down through the Mississippi River Valley there, including Alexandria, Louisiana, places like Jackson, Mobile, Biloxi, Gulfport. All those places are under the gun today for the greatest threat for strong tornadoes. Damaging winds also going to be very much in play today. The 45 hatched area here, this area in pink with the hatching, is where the greatest threat for strong damaging winds is going to occur. Hail, not so much of a threat today, but nonetheless, there will be some chance for hail if any discrete storms can fire, which looks unlikely at this point. So the main threats going to be tornadoes and damaging wind. So let's go ahead and get started here. Take a look at what we're seeing at the moment. This is our current satellite picture right now. You can see where our trough is. This kind of swirl here in the atmosphere. This is all a bunch of convection that's already ongoing, and we'll take a look at the radar in a second. Very high amplitude feature. You can see that there's kind of this swirl up here as well. A little bit of a shortwave digging down from Canada, as we discussed in our video yesterday, that's kind of merged with the kind of uppermost portion here of the main sort of long wave trough. But this is going to be our main player for today. It's kind of all conglomerated into one sort of high amplitude trough at this point. And if we look at our radar image right now, we've already got a squall line that is ongoing. You can see the radar here, very expansive squall line here down from pretty much the Missouri-Illinois border down through north central Arkansas, down into East Texas. So quite an expansive squall line at this point. Maybe some cellular elements in there right now, but you'll notice it's a pretty thin, sort of weak-ish looking squall line. That's because we're dealing with pretty weak instability at this point. We haven't seen much in the way of intensification this morning. We did see a couple tornadoes embedded in the line overnight, particularly one near Springdale, Arkansas, that caused some damage. But at this point, we're kind of in a lull in the intensity of this line. And if we look real quick at our instability, you can see that it's pretty weak out here ahead of the line, except for here down into East Texas, West Louisiana at this point. So that southern portion of the line may be the first to perk up here as we go into the early afternoon hours. But for now, pretty tame in this convective line. We do have some severe thunderstorm warnings for northern portions of this line, these more kind of cellular elements up here in Arkansas and into Missouri, kind of these little line echo wave pattern type features in here have prompted some severe warnings this morning. Let's take a look at our upper air maps right now. This is 500 millibars, and you can see pretty clearly where this trough is. Pretty well-defined trough here. Pretty neutrally or slightly positively tilted trough here. Axis going through western Kansas, western Oklahoma, down into West Texas. Little shortwave up in here, as we discussed on the satellite image. It's kind of merged with this main long wave sort of trough. A strong belt of flow rounding the base of this trough. But what's really impressive is our 850 millibar winds right now. If we go to our 850 map, our low-level jet, you'll notice we have a very potent low-level jet in place, particularly from pretty much southeast Missouri down southward. You'll notice 55 plus knots out here for much of the area out ahead of this squall line. So wind shear today is not going to be an issue. It's going to be extremely strong. If we look at our surface map here, you'll notice we've got our kind of elongated sort of low feature here, centered up here in northeast Iowa, kind of a cold front down here, on which this squall line is kind of taking shape here. Some little low centers, and some little meso lows along this cold front, along this squall line as well. But this is going to be the kind of mesoscale forcing mechanism for this squall line today. So you'll notice winds out ahead of the squall line, out of the south-southeast, going to help pump that moisture northward from the Gulf. If we look at our surface map here, let me refresh it, make sure we have the most up-to-date data. You can see here south-southeast surface winds here pumping these 70 dew points, upper 60s and 70s dew points here, relegated to far southern portions of the southeast here. Going to continue to pump that northward ahead of this squall line, so low-level moisture should not be an issue today. Even with northern extent, we have 60s dew points reaching as far north as kind of the Memphis area at this point into Little Rock and places northeast. That should continue to surge northward a little bit ahead of this line as it moves off to the east today. You can see where that cold front is, that wind shift kind of somewhere in there, and that squall line kind of right along that wind shift. So let's take a look at some soundings now, and we discussed this yesterday, but the main issue is moisture quality. This is Jackson sounding from 7 a.m. this morning. You'll notice once again we have very shallow moist layers where our kind of low-level moisture resides. Not very deep. Doesn't even go up to 850 millibars before we have this big sort of swath, big layer of dry, warm air, steep lapse rates aloft, that kind of elevated mixed layer. And once again today, out in the open warm sector, we have a huge cap in place. We saw that yesterday. We kind of struggled to break that cap until after dark, until that cold front came through and helped lift parcels upward. Storms kind of remained elevated, though, for the most part through Oklahoma. And I think that's going to be the case today. I really doubt that we're going to see any development ahead of this line. And we always talk about in the southeast, for the greatest threat for strong long track tornadoes, we want to see storms, isolated discrete supercells, form out well ahead of the line. And I think that's going to be very difficult to achieve today, given just how strong this kind of layer of dry, warm air is aloft. So I think the warm sector, thankfully, is going to remain capped, and the main severe threat is going to remain along the squall line for today. If we go down south to Slidell or New Orleans, much of the same. Very shallow moist layer, only going up to about 900 millibars here. Very well-defined kind of cap on the atmosphere there with that elevated mixed layer of dry air and warm air aloft. So again, I think warm sector supercell development is going to be very hard to come by today, just given this strong cap. And if anything does fire, it'll probably remain elevated, probably struggle to get going until that cold front arrives, which of course is accompanied by the squall line. So going to be difficult to fire warm sector convection today, but nonetheless we have storms already ongoing, and this line is not going anywhere and will only intensify as the day goes on. So let's take a look at our model runs. This is the 12Z NAM, hot off the press here. You can see our trough. This is at 500 millibars. Well-defined trough, kind of neutrally to slightly positively tilted. And that continues to move off to the east as the day goes on and acquires a fairly significant negative tilt here compared to what we were seeing this morning. Little kind of shortwave in here with very strong flow in the exit region of this trough. Over 100 knots of flow here at 500 millibars, so very, very strong. You will notice here that with northern extent, these 500 millibar winds are very much meridional or north-south, which, we've talked about this before in several videos. When we're talking about forecasting severe weather in the southeast, I really have never seen this meridional flow produce potent supercell events where we see discrete supercells, long track tornadoes from those supercells. Often the storm mode is an issue, and that's exactly what we're seeing today. Very strong flow, very meridional flow, going to continue to promote a more linear mode with storms here throughout the day. One area I am watching here is a little bit farther south, down along the immediate Gulf Coast here. So places like the I-10 corridor, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Slidell, Biloxi, Gulfport, Mobile. Places like that. Notice how the 500 millibar winds tend to be have a little bit more of a westerly component here. And that is going to allow shear vectors to be a little bit more perpendicular to the line down here in the southern portion of the risk area. And what that might do is that might allow this line to break up slightly into more broken, semi-discrete supercells here with southern extent. So that's going to be something we're going to have to watch today. With northern portions here, probably north of the I-20 corridor, probably Jackson, maybe places like Demopolis, Alabama, northward. Going to see more, pretty much a pure squall line with the chance for, again, embedded tornadoes given the very strong wind shear in place and significant damaging winds. But with southern extent here, we may have to watch for a kind of dissolution of the line into more broken, semi-discrete storms here with time today. So if that does occur, the strong tornado threat would be much higher here down in southern portions of the outlook area as opposed to more northern portions of the risk area. So here is our 850 millibar winds. You can see that maintains and strengthens throughout the day. We see these purples in here. Those are 70 plus knots here at 850 millibars, just about a kilometer above the ground. And low-level jet stretches all the way up to the Great Lakes region. And so this is a broad, expansive low-level jet, very strong winds here just above the surface. So I think we'll see some pretty nasty-looking photographs here once we get into taking some forecast soundings here in the warm sector ahead of this line. Here's our surface pattern. You can see that kind of elongated sort of low here, stretching with kind of multiple centers here along that cold front. And we do notice that the winds we do have kind of a broad warm sector here, winds out of the south-southeast here. But you'll notice that these south-southeast winds are pretty much the same as what we saw at 850 millibars. Not much turning in the low levels here. It's just a lot of speed shear. So we pretty much go from southerly winds here at 850 at about 75 knots. Surface winds, 20 to 25 knots here out of the southeast. So not a ton of veering of the winds with height in the lowest few kilometers, but there is excessive speed shear here, which tends to work in the southeast. If this was a setup anywhere else, I would say, well, because we don't have a lot of clockwise curvature in the hodograph, if we take kind of a look at a hodograph here, we'll take one at 21Z. Let's do it out here in southern Mississippi, out ahead of the line, and we'll show you just what we're talking about here. Not going to be a ton of turning in the lowest levels. So you can see we do have a lot of veering with height here in the lowest levels and throughout the entire sort of hodograph. But here in the effective inflow layer, which is kind of our most important layer, where those parcels are going to be ingested into the storm, we don't see a ton of turning in this hodograph. We see a little bit, but it's mostly speed shear, 20 to 25 knots here at the surface, increasing to 70 plus knots here at 850 millibars. So it's mostly speed shear, not a whole lot of directional shear in the low levels. So I would be a little skeptical in other places saying, oh yeah, well, this is not really the type of hodograph we want to see in the low levels for a lot of tornadoes. But because we already have the squall line in place, because it's not going to take much to get embedded circulations in the squall line, because there's a lot of speed shear here, a little bit of directional shear, I think that we will see a lot of spin-up tornadoes, perhaps some strong given the degree of low-level shear, perhaps some strong tornadoes embedded in the line as it moves off to the east. Places like Jackson, Mississippi, up toward Louisville, Starkville, Mississippi, up into western Tennessee, into eventually western Alabama, places like Birmingham, Tuscaloosa. But you'll notice here out in the open warm sector, out ahead of the squall line, very meager instability, and that's going to be an issue today. NAM, I actually think, has a decent hold on the surface temperatures for once. It's not too cool. You'll notice we do get that cap to somewhat erode here. We don't really see a ton of that very dry, warm air aloft here as we were seeing in the observed soundings from this morning. But because that cap was so strong to begin with, and we're going to need kind of that cold front and the main forcing to arrive. Once it does arrive, we're not going to be able to destabilize a ton. Also, given the fact that we're going to see clouds in the warm sector for much of the day, if we kind of zoom in here and take a look at our visible satellite, you'll notice we have quite a bit of cloud cover here out ahead of this squall line. Some breaks in the clouds, but not a whole lot of sunshine expected today. I think we're going to see more clouds kind of build in here as that moisture advection continues throughout the day. So destabilization going to be tough to come by here, I think, out ahead of the squall line. So it's another negative for discrete supercell development in the open warm sector, and instead kind of going to have to rely on the squall line itself to produce tornadoes and damaging winds, which should not be that hard. When you have this kind of wind here, just about a kilometer above the surface, 70 plus knot winds, that's going to be easy to transport downward through downdrafts. Once that cap erodes, it's going to be very easy to do. So there will be some significant damaging winds along this line, and that's why the SPC has highlighted that 45% hatched area for damaging winds here. Wind gusts in excess of 70 to 80 plus miles an hour are possible with this squall line, as well as the threat for spit-up tornadoes. Let's go to 0Z here. We'll take a couple more soundings, see how the environment progresses here. You can see the warm sector does get quite pinched here with northern extent. Let me zoom in here so you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, the warm sector does get pinched by that northern end of the squall line, but down here, where the forcing is a little bit weaker, the winds are a little bit weaker aloft, and we saw that a little bit more westerly sort of component to the 500 millibar winds here with southern extent. The squall line is going to lag behind slightly on its southern end. So we may not see pure frontal forcing down here. We may see the squall line kind of start to trail off here out ahead of the cold front a little bit, which is a plus in as far as this squall line kind of breaking up into semi-discrete sort of elements here. Frontal forcing a little less strong with southern extent. The winds at 500 millibars having a little bit more of a westerly component. So down here is a little bit concerning. We can still kind of see the same sort of photographs here at 0Z. Not a ton of turning in that effective inflow layer, but ample speed shear. 41 knots of shear in the lowest 1 kilometer of the atmosphere. Overall, photographs favorable for supercells, embedded supercells within the line. I still think embedded tornadoes are going to be a threat given the degree of low-level shear. I would expect there to be some strong tornadoes within that line as well. Down here to the south, I think kind of the same thing. If we get storms to break up a little bit into semi-discrete elements, I do think the tornado threat will be higher. But again, kind of meager instability here. Not really much in the way of instability out ahead of this kind of southern portion of the line. I would like to look at the wrap here just to make sure the NAM is not doing one of its, kind of typical sort of cool biases here. So let's take a look at the wrap for some consistency here. We'll take a look at a sounding out ahead. And the wrap is pretty much on board here with kind of weak instability throughout the column. So that is a plus. That may temper the significant tornado threat a little bit. Very similar photographs, lots of speed shear, not a whole lot of actual turning in that effective inflow layer. So the wrap is on board. Looks like the models are on board here for today as we go on with this squall line. Let's take a look at some cams here to end things off. We'll take a look at the HRRR here from 12Z. Actually, let's go to 14Z, see if it's out far enough. It's not, so let's go to 13Z here, the most recent HRRR run. So you see that squall line, pretty solid squall line here. The HRRR actually does try to fire some little, what we call colloquially, beans out ahead of the squall line here. Again, I think given the very strong cap in place, I don't think these are going to do anything. These do, if you can kind of see a little bit of kidney bean shapes there, kind of supercellular shapes there with some of these storms, but again, that strong cap in the warm sector I think is going to hinder any convective development out in the open warm sector, which would have a better chance for discrete supercell tornadoes, perhaps some strong, but I don't think these are going to go anywhere. I think these will mostly be just showers. But we get a lot of very potent line here all the way up to the north. If we go even up to the north a little bit, we see this line extends quite a ways up there into southern and central Illinois even, with some stratiform rain there. So some line echo wave patterns, some bow echoes within this line. These would have the potential to produce stronger winds at the surface, perhaps a tornado or two with those. But I think the main threat is going to center on this southern portion of the risk area, where the threat for, number one, strong damaging winds. You can see more of these kind of line echo wave pattern, sort of bow echo elements here. These would have the potential for the strongest winds at the surface, and perhaps tornadoes with them. And you'll notice as we go on with time here, that the HRRR actually maybe tries to break up this southern portion a little bit. Does stay pretty messy, pretty linear, but we do see kind of some semblance of cellular components within this line, especially with southern extent. Down here into far southeast Louisiana, the Mississippi and Alabama sort of boot heels, if you will. So that would be where the greatest threat for strong tornadoes is going to be as we go on through the evening and into the overnight. The line does, this model at least, does try to break up that southern portion of the line into kind of semi-discrete elements there with time. Let's take a look at the ARW here for some consistency. You can see pretty solid line here. Not much in the way of cellular development sort of on the southern end of the line, but maybe some embedded elements here. You can kind of see the supercell shapes in there. So I think the consensus with the models here, at least the convective allowing models, is to maintain the kind of solid line for most of the extent of this line. Strong damaging winds as far north as southern and central Illinois and areas nearby. And then the southern portion of this line, this is the FV3, and you can see here by 0Z it does really start to break this line up into kind of discrete convective elements here. So places like New Orleans, Slidell, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mobile, Fairhope, Foley, Alabama, Gulf Shores, and eventually on toward Pensacola in the Florida Panhandle, going to have to keep an eye on the threat for perhaps semi-discrete storms here into the evening and overnight hours here. This is at 4Z, so this would be approaching midnight. You can see we do have some sort of cellular elements in this line. Again, these would have the best threat for strong long-track tornadoes as well as damaging winds, while the northern portion of the line maintains kind of that linear kind of orientation, more of a damaging wind and embedded tornado threat with that. So we'll wrap it up there. Very potent storm system on tap for today. Again, moderate risk, level 4 out of 5 here. Large moderate risk area all the way up from basically Jackson, Tennessee, including Memphis, places along the Mississippi River, places like Greenville, Mississippi, Natchez, Vicksburg, even as far west as Alexandria, Louisiana, Ruston, Monroe. And then even New Orleans may get in on the action later tonight. Places like Gulfport, Biloxi, Mobile, Foley, Gulf Shores, even as far east as kind of Pensacola. Under the gun here for the best threat for strong tornadoes and damaging winds. So that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next video.